Good morning. I wanted to just make a little video to talk about cycles and a little bit why I'm always talking about cycles. It's a major part of my work, and one of the things I think about the most actually. Today in the northern hemisphere is Beltane. It's May 1st. It is a cross-quarter holiday, meaning it is a holiday that exists in between the equinoxes and solstices. And why these cross-quarter holidays are so important to me are because they indicate for us when a transition between seasons is starting. So they come from a Celtic earth-based calendar, and rather than marking the beginning of the season rather than marking the middle of a season as the beginning of the season, which we do in the Gregorian calendar. So we acknowledge the beginning of summer as June 21st, which is actually the longest day of the year and the height of summer. We acknowledge the beginning of winter as the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year and the depth of darkness. And what that does is that sets us up for feeling like we are always running to catch up with transitions and with cycles. And it also does something that we unfortunately also often do, which is that we don't sense a transition until we are smack in the middle of it. And then it is often running with us, and that has all kinds of effects and consequences. So what we have in the natural points of the transition of light and of movement of earth beneath our feet, that's what's happening in these cyclical transitions because of the relationship between the earth and the sun and the light and the dark. So here on Beltane, today, May 1st, is marked in the Celtic calendar as the beginning of summer. The spring equinox, as acknowledged as the very height of spring. So we are not only deep into spring, we are starting the very first touches of summer, which I can feel. I think we all can feel that there's something happening in the ripeness of the air, in the ripeness of the leaves. I'm sitting outside at my house right now looking at this beautiful cottonwood in front of me. Like, there's a way that the leaves are starting to fill out into, this is a very verdant, green, fertile season. The Beltane, for in the Celtic calendar, it's like the most fertile season. It's extremely green. There's a sort of fecundity that we feel that's different than the beginning of that fecundity at the beginning of spring, which is trembling, which is quaking, which is what it takes to bring life from the quiet and the gestation of winter into form, is that trembling of spring. We are past that threshold and we're moving into this sort of warm, luscious footing into summer and into this part of our natural cycles. So cycles, I feel like a sweeping statement we could make that is probably true, I think it's true, is that almost all of our pain and suffering as a planet, as a people, as a culture, comes from resisting, ignoring, or forcing cycles, of ignoring endings when endings are trying to happen, of forcing beginnings when something is still in its quiet, fallow time, of not letting a beginning happen or a ripeness happen when that is what is trying to happen. And this happens all the time. I mean, as simple as when and how we receive information about what cycle we're in is somatically. We get, or we don't get, cues in our system and in our body somatically through sensation about what cycle we're in, what cycle we're moving toward, and what cycle is calling us. So Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes Reyes, she has brought in another family name. She's one of my root teachers, and she's always talking about cycles. And one of the things she speaks about is the life-death-life cycle. That we are in, life is a life-death-life cycle. That there is life, that when life peaks, when there is an apex of energy, what that descends down into is a decline and eventually a death. And a death, fallow time always brings a spring. And we're always in a life-death-life cycle. And our harmony, because we are a natural process, we are not just like nature, we actually are nature. We are a natural process just like this tree and the seasons and the weather. We are moving in a life-death-life cycle. We are moving in a cycle of the movement of life just like all of nature. And what we are facing on the planet is an insistence of maintaining a certain cycle without allowing other cycles to have their time. It is why we are in a climate crisis, because of our insistence on production, being in a perpetual false summer, on light, on warmth, on heat, on all of the things, on moving, on fossil fuels, on gas. Like, what is it that keeps an engine going? Always. We must always, always have an engine that keeps going. And so, sorry, my little earbuds made a sound. I hope they're still working. So, our paying attention to cycles and our sensitizing our flesh, our tissue, our systems to hearing the call of what cycle we're being brought into, to me, is one of our sort of greatest agencies in contributing to harmony, in maintaining harmony, and in staying close to a rhythm that actually is natural to us. So here we are at the beginning of summer, the very beginning. We're not in the middle of summer. We're attuning to, we're getting sensitive to the beginning of a change, rather than denying that a change is happening until we are smack dab in the middle of a transition. And we can all, I think, relate to that. And the feeling of, where did summer go? How can summer be already over? Where did winter go? Where did spring go? And that is inevitable if we're actually only acknowledging that something is beginning when it's actually in the middle of its cycle. So we are moving into the heart, the season of the heart in Chinese medicine, into the fire element, into the phase of life. So there's a part of us that feels like we're just waking up out of winter. Why it's important for us to get on board in the Northern Hemisphere with the fact that it's a starting summer is because by the beginning of August, we're going to be moving into fall. And if we feel like we're just waking up out of winter, by the time that comes, we are going to be having a whole experience about what is unexpressed in us, about what we didn't quite enjoy or admit or soak in. So we're in this phase where we are moving to the highest yang time of year, Y-A-N-G, to the apex of energy, to full shining, to the sun directly above, to the warmest part of the year, the longest days, the most life energy that's moving into the extremities of the trees, where we've gone from all of the gathered energy in winter through the birth of spring into a fully expressed summer, the blossoming of flowers, fruit, a ripening, a shining. The heart and the fire element are about joy, connection, love, courage, the risk of what it is to express fully, the courage and vulnerability of what it is to be seen. Summer is such a season of being seen, and we see that in all kinds of ways socially as human animals as well as in nature. And so if we do not let ourselves move totally into summer, on all levels, if we don't let our heart shine, if we don't totally let ourselves express, then by the time fall comes and there is a natural drawing in of energy in the fall that eventually leads to all the sugars being pulled into the tree, to all of the leaves falling to the ground, if we haven't actually expressed, there's nothing for us to let go of. And that is a setup for us to enter fall and winter with a deep kind of grief, because it doesn't come as a relief, it comes as a suffocation, because we haven't actually let go of. We haven't had anything to let go of. So there's no coming home if we haven't gone out. There's no letting go if we haven't actually let ourselves blossom and shine and express and risk and love. And so there's a way that when we are taking care of the current cycle, we are always tending to a future self, and we are always taking care of a future cycle. This summer season and heart element is often really, it's interesting because as much as we are a culture in the West, in the progress forward modern West, that is addicted, mostly in the United States, more than even Europe, mostly addicted to a kind of perpetual false summer, which is always being on, always being happy, always being in the light, always producing, going. Like, it is a personal crisis for us when we feel a kind of inward pull that would make us actually need to take a break. I mean, that is not actually natural. So even though we're living in this kind of false young perpetual summer, there's actually so much about the heart, our experience of heart and fire element, that is misunderstood and that we are afraid of, we avoid, we don't let happen. We often mistake anxiety, a feeling of, we often, sorry, let me rephrase that. We often mistake the heart trying to bloom and risk as anxiety. We often mistake this kind of flight of the heart that is a sort of, there's an ecstasy in the fire element and in the heart as much as there is a tenderness and a vulnerability. So when we shy away from that, or we don't understand the somatic signal of a heart trying to come alive, we mistake that as anxiety and we try to kind of get it to be quiet, that is painful. We suffer deeply. So I would say almost all of the work I do is with cycles, all of it. But particularly every seasonal transition, I do a workshop collaboration with my friend and colleague Liz Koch, and I also do a 6-week series, which is, okay, let's actually consciously span the transition of this and work with gestures and archetypal movement forms that actually are a medicine for embodying this transition. Whether or not we're in a different personal cycle, we might personally be in a season of grieving right now, of letting go as summer is blooming. We have to tend to both. We have to let ourselves be in a personal cosmology as well as a natural, more global cosmology that's happening. I don't mean global like political. I mean natural cosmology happening around us, wherever we're living. So I want to make this as an invitation and a little bit of a why and so what about the cyclical work that I do. this particular transition, it's like if you have a hard time with fall and winter, we need to tend to summer. We need to actually let the heart express and feel what that is somatically. Through the archetypal Qigong forms, what we're doing is we're getting into a map and a medicine and a mirror of a certain sensation and quality and archetype of this transition that helps us understand when we're in this transition, when it's not summer, when we're in a transition from the beginning phase of something into full shining, in a project, in a relationship, in a conversation, in an art piece, in anything. This sensitizing to the somatic cues and embodiment of cycles becomes something we get to reference and lean back on all the time. What does it feel like when we're being called into autumn? When we're being called into letting go? When we're actually being called into a death phase of letting something die? When we're being called into a birth phase? What does it feel like when something's trying to be born? That's not just restlessness. It's not just an angsty sort of disgruntlement with current circumstance. Often what that is something is trying to be born. What is it when something's trying to go from the beginning phase of it into a completion, a follow through, a shining, and a full expression? Some of us get we loop and circle in perpetual beginnings. We start a million projects and don't finish any of them. That's what we're at, that threshold here. This is way longer than I intended it to be, but I love talking about this. And regardless, like if we can start to just look into the transition that is before us and look into nature as an actual mirror, not as a metaphor, but how is this happening inside of me? Where and how is this happening inside of me? And can I hear the cycle I'm being called into and let myself express that? Happy May to you. Beginning of summer. And when we reach the summer solstice in 6 weeks, we will be in the middle of summer.